Good evening, everyone. Welcome. My name is Renee Green, and I'm director of ACT, a program in art, culture, and technology. And I welcome you to another episode in the ACT lecture series with a focus on cinematic migrations. Cinematic migrations is related to the notion that cinema can now be thought in the present as an umbrella term used for the variety of moving image and time-based forms that currently circulate and which have intersecting yet specific histories of emergence. To continue exploring this proposition, I invited Knut Åsdam. Knut Åsdam is an artist and filmmaker whose work explores the subjectivity of social structures, history, language, struggle, and the body. His work also addresses the usage and perception of urban public spaces. Åsdam's experimental use of narrative and dramaturgy moves between social discourse and hallucinatory disintegration, in addition to narrative film. Åsdam also works with photography and installation, and his work has been exhibited in numerous institutions, including the Oslo National Museum, Tate Modern, Depo in Istanbul, Bergen Kunsthall, and he's also currently working on 3 film projects. He's been incredibly productive over the past years, and has a book that's been published with his 2010 exhibition, which was held at Bergen Kunsthall, and focused on 2 films, one called Abyss and the other Tripoli, both produced in 2010. I will not go on too long about all of the various projects that he's been involved with and also the interesting intersections that have occurred. And I'm going to just pass this over to Knut Åsdam. Welcome.
Yes, hello. Thank you for coming. So I'm going to show a selection of some recent works, which I think outlines quite well my concerns these days. I just want to tell a little bit about my background because I think it relates to how I'm working with film today. Before I started to work with art, I was mainly writing in terms of like poetry and short narrative texts and so on. And then I started working with visual art, mainly with installation, often dealing with the social space and public space and so on, and performance-oriented videos that, on one hand, came up from the tradition of performance-oriented video and so on. You imagine the early video works in the 70s and so on. And like that work, also had a strong connection to dance works. But of course, I came some generations later, so the dance I was referring to was maybe a little bit different. And I also worked with music as a DJ and so on in the early 90s. And then, like Renee mentioned, with photography and installation and so on. So all these things are maybe, well, not all those things. You can't really see the music side of it so much in my films, but this thing of relating to narrative and to movement from a tradition that's used it as a kind of very constructed media is something that's you definitely see in this work. And also a kind of photography practice. I was first and foremost interested in observing and using aspects of the kind of material society around us in terms of like houses and housing and street environments and so on. So these are things that all come together, I guess, in some ways in my film practice, and it has influenced a lot the way I work with film. As has been mentioned, I was educated through a kind of art system, like so many people that are working with kind of moving image works within the kind of cinema umbrella, like René called it today. So, and that's, I guess, kind of apparent. And like many other practitioners, I guess I'm working in this space between what's conventionally considered a kind of film institutions and art institutions. And that also, of course, includes different ways of presenting the work, like from cinemas to film festivals and to installation practices in art institutions and so on. While my work in the 90s were more oriented around issues around subjectivity and how that relates to ideas of the body or masculinity and so on, and then later on into working with social spaces. In the last 10 years, I guess the focus has been more on one hand, using the kind of social space, existing social space, found spaces in cities and so on, but also during the last few years dealing more with the ideas of history. So I'm going to start with showing you a film from 2008 called Oblique, and it was first shown at Manifesta in 2008, where René was also showing, in an installation there, and it's shot on a train. Was shot on a train moving through a kind of European landscape in change. The actual site is in Lithuania, on the train between Vilnius and Klaipėda. But the way I worked with locations at that time, which has changed a bit, as you'll see, it could have been shot many other places. It could have been shot in France or in Spain or in Germany, and so on. Certainly would have looked different. But the main thing was really to shoot on a train that was moving through a kind of landscape that had layers of, or had remnants of different times, different kind of economic times, buildings collapsing, buildings being erected, gentrification and collapse and so on, these kind of larger processes visible. Anyway, let's see if I can get this to be... Just wait a minute. Oh, there you go. Sorry. Oh, sorry, there's a little technical glitch there. He wants... Can I get rid of this? Right, you have to bear with the pink and white framing.
Are you afraid of me?
No.
You should be. If I make up my mind to take you on, you will learn what fear is. I have powers that few others have ever mastered.
What kind of powers?
Mental powers. A force of will that can bend the physical world into any shape I want. Do you remember the blackout and the stock market crash?
Last fall?
Precisely. I was the one that caused them. Approximately at 5 o'clock, I said to myself, I wish that the whole world had to live in the same darkness and pity as I do. In less than 1 hour, all the lights in the city were out. And in less than 2, markets were crashing all over the place. What kind of powers do you have?
Normal people power.
Can I have this? Can I have a cucumber?
Sure.
I think he's roughing it.
This is the story. I came upon this woman. She was crouched down and silent. She spoke to me quietly. She appeared to be a mother. She said, "It demands from you now. It demands that you come clean, that you manage not just to throw up all the things you imagine about others or what you think is wrong with others, but that you come out with the stories that are within yourself. The stories that motivate you in your assault on others. You've got to come clean, remember? Remember?
I sit down on a late night train. She comes. Slightly Middle looking, chewing gum, curly hair, a slightly broad nose, many tiny teenage pimples on her skin. I catch her gaze from a distance. Seconds later, she asks in German if the seat across from me is free. She asks more questions about the time, very friendly. Around her neck sparkles a stud-encrusted cross. Chews gum, reads book, texts from phone. I open my eyes, and she's gone. It's like losing money.
There's something going on here. Some kind of something. Some kind of European something. Something.
It's like rush hour without a job. Like looking into a fishbowl. The young man in the bad trousers begging for money. The older guy also begging for money. The dealing, the short change, the short escape. The song, the boundary, the gaze. The long gaze, the bent gaze. That is some looking. Too many bad buildings, too many good ones. Too much collapse, too much restoration. Two persons talking about something, about anything. Words that are put to the test every day and that have a hard time surviving through the course of an everyday. You know, words that survive trying to find money every day. Words that survive trying to find affirmation every day. Words that survive trying to encounter love every day. Words that survive trying to see oneself in the world. not orphaned or displaced in the everyday. Words that have a hard time.
What are you looking at?
Hi. Can I sit?
Sure.
All these things that come out of me.
I'd rather not think about it.
Have you heard about the plane crash today?
Yes. I don't want to know.
You have to hear about this. This is very serious.
Yes. But I don't want to hear.
160 people are dead. Half of them are children.
I told you not to tell me.
I admire you for that.
Take people sitting around the table playing cards, hands dealing, liquid is spilled, napkins, difficult to have control, falls asleep, train moving, close-ups, etc. One gets up, leaves, walks corridors, loses something on the floor, attempts to get it up, get it back.
Active. Camera pans around. R or M get up. Moves down corridor. Take the eye drops again. Attraction. Get back. Play cards.
Income. I have to get rent. I have to get food. I have to pay for life. I have to pay for others. I have to pay for life. Seduction.
Balance, emptiness, a suspension of time or being left in space, left in time, left in language.
Outgo. Expenditure. Excess. Language. Generosity. Speech. Violence. Acting out seduction.
Receive. Interpretation. To understand, but also to feed back, to accept, to hear also what you don't want to hear.
Passive. Apathy. Acceptance. Masochism. Lack of interpretation. Lack of care. Dissolvement.
Yield. It's time to yield, time to let go, time to not be in the way, but also to abandon a project. Who sings that song?
Who sings that boundary?
How do you sing the boundary?
It is like a song sung by you, by somebody.
Not me this time.
that's it. So I guess that was the last of a series of works, like I mentioned, that where I worked more generically with places that had strong similarities to other cities. Like I shot a film in New York, and in Istanbul and in Genoa, where I kind of pieced it all together to one city, trying to shoot in environments which had some kind of common, I guess, issues at play, and which were recognizable also in the urban environments and so on. And of course, this is in Lithuania, and these particular houses and so on are there and look more like there, and some other parts of surrounding Eastern Europe than other places. But at the same time, the same setup I could have gotten easily in other parts of Europe. And it was a bit motivated by actually, on one hand, it's a very short reference at the end of this thing of singing a boundary. So I think it was, if I'm not mistaken, a text by Judith Butler. Somebody might correct me, but on this idea of the boundary and of the rising nationalism and so on in Europe, and the kind of cultural component, I guess, this idea of culture being implicit in it. Of course, this is not something that's thematized explicitly in the film, but just this idea of the kind of cultural component of this idea of borders and the kind of physical relationship to it, the physical relationship to kind of any kind of cultural interpretation or cultural claim on Europe, I thought was interesting. And I had been making a series of works, and I guess I continue that further in subsequent works, where I've been quite occupied with this idea of migration in Europe, and where often it's presented as a kind of crisis phenomenon. I guess it is to some extent also within the kind of contemporary political debate in the States also, you know, like what are we going to do with immigration reform or not, and all these things, like as if it's kind of pressing on to be presented as this kind of a recent topic or this kind of new crisis. But of course, if you look at Europe, as if you look at anywhere else, really, the nation states are pretty recent, and the whole history of the development of these cultures are histories of movements of people and customs and so on throughout times and throughout the history. So I became interested in this way of looking at somewhere and looking for layers of change. In this film, it's more kind of maybe more abstracted. You see all buildings belonging to another political system or something like this. If you dig into it, and you can see, you know, kind of Soviet architecture and buildings that belong to different economic and ideological time. And then you have the kind of, you know, more recent, generic buildings that look much like anywhere else in Europe and so on. So you have this kind of, you can see visually this changes. But in any case, I was also then through different works trying to break up this idea of the kind of composition of people. One thing is, of course, relating in the most mundane way to kind of film conventions, where, like in mainstream film media and so on, if you're gonna where you have this strong idea of kind of neutralized casting and so on, which is of course a total construct and has very little to do with the society as it is today. So, you know, everyone will be at the same level or from similar kind of ethnicities and so on, or that people always have to represent their ethnicities within the film. So the way I work, none of the actors are kind of representing their people per se, but they are, on the other hand, they are showing something to a society that's more composite and is composed in a different way than maybe it was in Europe, say, you know, 20 years ago or 30 years ago or something. This film, as many of my films, then is something that is moving through different spaces of reception, and it depends a lot on the kind of local context. In some countries, there's openness towards showing artist films and so on in cinemas and so on. So, for example, in England, I had shown more of my things in a cinema context. Otherwise, it's film festivals and so on, but more often art context, museums, and so on. And it's also, if you talk about kind of migration of cinema, of course, it's also this movement of many filmmakers into the art world, because the art world is, even though it has obviously lots of problems and limitations and so on, it's has been more open to different kind of content than the film world has become. And but in the context of exhibitions, I'm quite interested in working with that context and the kind of time-based nature of the viewer or participant walking around in the space and so on. So for the first time I showed this piece, I made this kind of fence installation. So just using kind of fences from construction sites or around kind of storage areas, corporate areas, and so on. So not this kind of low fencing you would have around a private home. Also to kind of continue working with the idea of like sight lines and kind of optical axis and so on. The long wall in this fence will be, I guess, about like 55 feet or something, if I'm converting it correctly. So it also operates as a kind of closure of the space to one extent, but of course you can see through it. And in the middle, I have this, not in the middle, but like first you come into more like a kind of courtyard, and then you come to inner space, which is a double thickness kind of fence space with just this live vegetation. So in a way, it's just taken from a kind of convention of parks, really, where kind of growth and so on grows all over the fences. And then I had this construction cloth on the inside. So it was also to make a space that wasn't just totally closed off like a black box, but there's a kind of sense of translucency, and there's a kind of announcement of things outside into the inner space. But just in order to make a space that's not totally closed off, but still dark enough to show the film, and concentrated enough space in relation to other bodies and so on, other viewers and so on. That would be the entrance to that. But after making this, after making Oblique, I was thinking much more about just this idea of images and the idea of representing migration in imagery. And in the studio, we started to think about, when people have written and published things relating to migration, what kind of images have they used? What kind of images have they been posting with these articles and so on? And so we started this kind of migration archive, and we started also looking at tried to look at things across time. Obviously, there's much more imagery available today because of digital imagery and so on. So there's an overload of that, but we also made a lot of trips to different libraries and so on in some different countries. And otherwise did research online. I had some people working on this in different countries and working on imagery from different continents and different countries around the world, really just trying to see what kind of imagery came up. And it grew to an archive of about 3,000 images so far. But what started as kind of a way of trying to look at the idea of migration as represented in images and trying to work with that for actually for constructing some scenes in a film coming up, became more, I guess, a kind of study of adaptation, really. So many of the images, I mean, some of them are very dramatic or tied to very kind of known specific historical conflicts or forced kind of migration of children from poor families around and so on, or to more recent natural catastrophes and so on. But many of them also not really, understandable as images in themselves to the context of migration, but still where this kind of imagery that's being used to illustrate this idea. So I guess it became more an archive of kind of human adaptation to change, really. It's a bit hard to see, but the way I've shown it, this is actually from an installation in Vilnius. I showed it at the National Museum in Oslo and at the Bergen Kunsthall and so on. But it just continues to grow. Then some of these images became templates for scenes in a film called Abyss, which I made just afterwards. And it can be hard to see the relationship because Abyss is a kind of plotless narrative film. So obviously you get more, might get more occupied with the way people are, what's being said, what's the dialogue, and what's happening in the film. But at the same time, it allowed me a way to just look through a kind of way of layering of representation of change in imagery, really. So you see things from war, or there's some things like cultural migration, like this Korean soldiers with this hip hop show, or things that are just totally tangential, like this woman in relationship to this waterfall, and so on. And I guess also it relates to, I mean, this is, just printouts, A4 printouts on paper hung on the wall. But this kind of side-by-sideness of this thing of having images that are belonging to very different contexts next to each other is, of course, something that we're very used to today. But it's also something that somehow relates to the idea of cinema, in my opinion, which I see cinema really as a kind of extended collage way of working by putting lots of different aspects together, but also this thing of having this uncontrollability of the next image. So. Yeah. So I'm going to show you just a little bit of a film called Abyss. It's from 2010 also, which was the kind of basis of this work with this archives, really. I won't show you the whole thing because it will take more than the rest of the lecture. So.
Hey, look at that. Here, it's in blue. I love that car. It went up there.
What?
It just turned the corner.
I'm not talking about the car.
You know that you could do up this car? Get this car going better? A friend of mine has one like this, and he has lowered it and just up the engine.
Engine.
I mean, it's crazy. It's fast. Freaky fast. We were driving up north. It was like cyclists flying left and right. But he has better shocks than you. Just do that, change the shocks before anything, and you got a new car. Then I would tune the engine, you know. You can get a lot more out of this one, you know, without making it look different or anything. Just juiced up. Do you think that I should get piercing higher up as well? Would you like it? You think I would look good?
I'm sorry, was I driving? I mean, I can't look at you right now. I mean, you know, I don't know. I guess that would make you look a little harder, tougher.
What, tougher? I thought better, like better looking. I really need to move. I need to get a new flat or something. Over here, it's just like some wannabe ghetto. I want to be able to walk out the door and not be afraid of people I don't know. Why are you not looking at me? Do I look ugly?
It's not really up to me. It's up to the mirror.
Oh, well, people look better in the mirror because they see themselves differently from anyone else. They see themselves mirrored. Everything the wrong way around. Positive becomes negative. And the other way around. So, I look good or bad? I don't know. In a car like this, it's different. Everybody sees you in a box. Dark glass, light glass. But it's the people outside that worry me. Why aren't they more helpful and less messy?
Thank you. Well done. All right. Thank you much. Thank you. Back, please.
Thank you.
Thank you much.
Yeah, bye.
Let's move on.
Okay, mister.
Only
All sizes have a look.
It goes this way. It's that way around.
I think it looks better this way. Whatever.
Why'd you do that? She didn't like it. You don't make friends that way.
Well, you definitely don't make friends that way either. At least not with me.
It's about having respect for somebody else than yourself.
No, you're just worried about being embarrassed. It's cool.
What about that one? That's good for you.
This, I think that's really more your style. Get a little.
Right. How old's this one? Can't be that old. We already carried this stuff. Yeah, but it looks kind of tired.
It's a great way to make new friends.
Yeah, but look, it looks old.
Old to you.
What about that one? That's nice.
What's this? Oh my God, it's so obviously only about money. Not even real money, pretend money. I can't believe you would like something like that.
It's nice.
I'm going down the street, following this woman. She walks a few steps in front of me, but she's hesitating every now and then. I don't want to walk too close. I think she might think I'm following her. But she continues going in the same direction I'm going, just in front. I start getting a bit closer, so I think, oh, I'm going to cross the road. But she also crosses the road just in front of me. This goes on for a while. Then I think to myself, oh, I'm going to walk a bit faster to get in front of her, but she starts walking faster. All the while, I notice that she's starting to drag her foot a bit, more and more, until eventually her one foot's pretty much being dragged by the other. She starts to breathe heavily too. So I look at her. Just look, you know. Then I get in front.
This one.
It's not bad, I guess. That big belt's too shiny.
Wait a second. I went to see that apartment. The whole area is completely changed. It's all coffee bars and shops and everything now. The guy showing me around the apartment, he didn't even tell me anything about the place. He just went on about how much it was a great area now. Like he was letting me in some kind of trade secret or something. I just kept thinking about if it was really a nice place for all the people that lived there before, you know? Or it was some kind of hell space or a nice place. You know, where'd they put them all? All those people. What kind of world opens up and just receives them?
Well, gotta make a call. What are you looking at? Me?
Look at your money.
Yeah. It's me. Yeah, okay. Okay. Thanks.
Here before I spend it.
Is that it? Here, you take this for a second?
She's falling behind. I could see it today. There's something changing. She's lacking speed or focus. I'm closer than normal. Just a step or two behind. I'm already jacked in. I can feel it fast, flowing fast. I'm gaining with every step. It's there behind the wall, like a visor bending the air around my body. Shit. I've got to focus. Got to find the point. The start point. There. I can fix my eyes now. I'm going on. I'm up. I'm up like high. The air is cold and clear. I can feel it touch the walls of my lungs. I can feel the pain in my shoulder. I've got to keep in there, jacked, flowing. The city's a double exposure. Behind the real and imaginary, oblique. I need the evening to pull me back in the space. Behind my own reflection.
I haven't slept enough. I'm falling off. I can feel it coming up. I can feel that trickle in the vein. I'm climbing now, up higher than the rest. The city. My veins protected by a double layer of glass. Gotta focus. I can feel someone behind me. Gotta climb a bit more, then dive fast. Crazy fast. My head is coming on. Think I'm jacking in. Now focus. Look, ground is coming up too fast. Gotta stay up. Enough. Stay high enough. Gotta keep the blood flowing. I haven't slept enough. I'm falling off. My leg. Feel that pain? Like a fucked up trickle up, down a vein. It won't move.
But it goes on and on. Then, but in any case, the, this this is an important scene. But anyway, I could go on, and then I would use up all the time. But anyway, it was shot in London, as you probably figured out, and I was then at the same time working similarly to some other films where I was like looking for a specific site to shoot the film where I could have these kind of layers of change throughout time and so on. And for different reasons, I wanted to shoot it in England. But in England, you have a lot of very composite environments. But in the end, I ended up shooting it in London because of what you could get in one shot. You could get so many different kind of aspects of change, both contemporary and historically. And it was shot just after the big financial crisis of 2008, 2009, and it left London in a very kind of paradoxical situation, and because it was struggling really, really hard, but at the same time it was gearing up for the Olympics, so huge projects, and big segments of this film shot in either environments that are changed, that actually don't exist anymore, like markets that were changed because of new building developments and so on, but also on the Olympic sites, like as the big constructions for the arenas and so on were coming up. So you had this kind of collapse and kind of erection of huge kind of environments at the same time, and the film is kind of playing itself out in that, and partly commenting on very kind of material things, but also picking up a kind of psychological narrative where, as you could have guessed from the last scene you saw, O here, which is the main character, she goes from being more observing kind of material detail and so on, or to having more kind of a physiological and psychological disintegration, I guess, through the film. Again, I worked with this kind of idea of this kind of plotless narrative, I guess, and it's maybe very close to what Monica Fludenik has coined as a very bad term, I think, natural narratology, which, there's nothing natural really about a kind of form of narrative like this. But I guess her real point is really this thing of not structuring films in terms of kind of plot lines and just letting the elements in the film just be placed one after each other or on top of each other or whatever, and then you kind of sewing them together afterwards or during the process as a viewer, that things aren't constructed in terms of plot. And this is the kind of format I also think is quite nice and allows me kind of freedom as a filmmaker, which is much more like what we're used to in terms of literature, where we're not surprised by being on one page that's describing a kind of political situation or economic situation of society, and halfway down we go into some kind of hallucination. And but in many ways, kind of recent film practice has been much more conservative, maybe. And I also, I'm trying to just get rid of this image. Sorry. Just a moment. Sorry. I can do it. Yeah. And this also led me on to starting to work with some other projects. One thing also I was quite interested in what was happening with the writing at this time from Oblique and through this film, and how to incorporate the kind of issues I wanted to talk about, like, for example, economic change and the kind of interpretive crisis for people within it. So I looked more into different types of literature, I guess, which I'll show you. Came to kind of extreme version in one of my films. But I was also starting to look at more at particular environments, I guess, a shift from finding generalized environments that could apply to my films to working with found environments and dealing with them. So at the moment, I'm working with several different new projects, and one is in Oslo. It's in a part of Oslo called Grorud, and it's maybe the largest part of the city, but it's a part of the city that has no real stable identity. While the other parts of the city haven't really changed much. They're much the same now as in terms of kind of feel and identity as they were like 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 50 years ago. Obviously, things have changed. You find different stores and so on, but the kind of identity of these areas is pretty much the same. But Grorud didn't exist as anything else but farmland until the Second World War. And then after the Second World War, it was built up really quickly, first for migrants from other parts of Norway, and then later on from people from other parts of the world and so on. So while Oslo as a whole has about 25% non-Westerners, then Grorud has about 50. So it's quite different. At the same time, it's an area that has mainly its representation in media and so on has been mainly one of crisis, and so it's only mentioned in the kind of context of a kind of crisis when there's like a school performing badly or something. Well, in fact, it's a really constructed thing because it's just as composite as any kind of town or city would be in Norway by itself, and it has good schools, bad schools, apartment block complexes that are socially very good and ones that are really problematic and so on, and single family houses, row houses or whatever. But what it does have, which is interesting for me, is that it kind of has this identity of being the edgeland of the city. So it's kind of where the last kind of urban cramps of the city happen, like where it kind of just suddenly stops and outside it you just have forest. And also some of the planning has been kind of made, a lot of the planning has been made for a kind of growth that didn't really happen, even though there has been a lot of growth, it didn't happen in the way that it was planned. So throughout that part of this of the city, you find a lot of complexes and ambitious ones that have been designed with an idea of the population which never kind of occurred and never existed. And some things are very recognizable also, just like here there's this road where it was built in the 60s for more traffic than they ever got. So it's just become a walkway, for example. I'm making a film there, and I worked for about 5 years, or maybe a little bit more on it. And I've been working on constructing the whole narrative from found stories. So through meetings with lots of people, from working with youth groups and youth clubs to middle-aged people and senior centers and so on, working on different kind of cultural groups and so on. Together with a kind of group that have been working with me, I've been kind of constructing and piecing together a kind of narrative that's not really about making a documentary, so not about kind of representing a story or something like this, a true story within the film, but rather to make a kind of snapshot of a time and a place. And another project that I'm working on at the moment is in northern Russia, the northwest of Russia. And Norway, where I come from, is kind of belongs to Western Europe, but it bends in the north. It bends really far east. So while the kind of southwest coast of Norway is very close to England, the kind of north-east part is further east than, or just as far east as Kiev. And in those areas it meets Russia. And isn't part of Europe, which until about 150 years ago, it didn't have any borders. So you would see like an old map of Norway, Sweden, Finland, Russia, and so on. You see all the lines kind of drawn up quite far north, and then they would just stop. And then because of the kind of rise of nationalism and building of national states and so on in the 1800s, these lines were finally kind of drawn, pulled together, and so on. But what you have then is a kind of culture that's really used to mobility. And it's not that, that it was unproblematic and so on, with a lot of conflicts and so on, but the different kind of groups of people, the groupings of people there has through history been able to kind of move from the coast to kind of inland or whatever, or to move from one city to another and so on, without being defined by these kind of national borders in the same way as you would do just a little bit further south. And but of course, then you got the nation states, the kind of buildup of nation states and so on in the 1800s, and then you got the Soviet Revolution and the Cold War. So then this border got very heavily fortified, and then of course in the Second World War also it was an area of some of the worst fighting in the Second World War. So it was. Let me see. I can turn on a bit of background imagery here. I'm just going to skip. This is just some examples of. Just a moment. Oh, here we go. Yeah, so that orient themselves from whatever. So still today, there are thousands of dead bodies and bodies in this area, which had never been cleared up because of the kind of, a lot of it was military zones and so on. And but at the same time, both because in Norway, when the Germans pulled back, they burned down everything. So in the Norwegian old towns, there's nothing old. Everything is new because everything was burned down at the end of the Second World War. And Murmansk is a big city up in the Arctic there. But it's a total Soviet city, so it has no small houses and so on. It's just like this kind of modern complex of apartment blocks and so on. So you have an old region that is kind of soaked in European history. Everywhere you look there's some kind of history and kind of poignant part of European history. But both the infrastructure and a large part of the population is quite young. So yeah, this is from Murmansk. And so this is also a project that we've been working on for several years now. And it's going to be a kind of contemporary border narrative. So this is actually a fiction film project, feature length, and it's dealing with a contemporary border narrative. So you have this, since the collapse of the Soviet Union, you have the kind of opening up a bit of the border to lots of people's people had to really change their perception of their local environment. People in my generation that grew up in Kirkenes, just on the Norwegian side of the border, were used to kind of being out in what they thought was the wilderness, like picking berries and so on, and they've been customized through their whole life to never look at the border and never look at the Russian border guards, the Soviet border guards at that time then, and so on. So when the Iron Curtain came down, they were shocked not only to actually then see, because they really learned to unsee these people on the other side, but they also realized that they weren't in wilderness. They could see all the chimneys of close by Soviet mining towns, or even the apartment blocks and so on. So their whole kind of perspective on this area changed. And but so it's people have now attempted to try to kind of loosen up this the strictness of this border and try to kind of live their life across this border again. And you have people going for work, like for example working on the Norwegian side but living in Russia. You have students going to different sides. You have your businessmen, you have people going shopping, you have prostitutes, and you have all these different kind of levels of society kind of crossing this border. So the Murmansk Kirkenes is dealing with that situation. But also what's happening at the same time is that the European Union is fortifying its borders. So you have this kind of, which you probably have heard of, this kind of progress towards the, or development towards kind of fortress Europe. So as the kind of borders are kind of east within Europe, they're getting much stronger, much more fortified between the EU and the Schengen area. Norway isn't part of EU, but it's part of Schengen, and what's outside. So it's making a kind of new definition of borders that's just as ideological and political as the one that's been before, and it's making kind of new claim on what is Europe. That's on one hand quite ahistorical, because it's not because it doesn't deal with all that stuff that's on the other side of the border and the kind of influence of that to Europe on the west. But of course also it's totally to do with the kind of political history that we are in today. So yeah, let's see if I can close that. Then in around the same time as I was making Abyss, I started working on another film. I had actually I was going to shoot it already in 2008, but this is a film from Tripoli in Lebanon, northern Lebanon, and as much as I really hated when people said that my work was about architecture, because I always thought, okay, my work is not about I'm not interested in architecture per se. I'm interested in place, like a specific space, that's specific in terms of a kind of cultural and social history, and I can use buildings and built environments to tell something about that, because the buildings are obviously always quite significant of their time and so on. But then I saw this imagery from Tripoli, and it was this Oscar Niemeyer complex that was built it started to be built in the 60s, at a time when Lebanon was really a success story in the Middle East, but it was never finished because of the outbreak of the Civil War in '75. So it became this kind of instant ruin. And I started to plan to make a work in response to that. And yeah, I can show it to you now. Oh.
You should use the other foot next time. Or your head. Let your head meet the ball. I want to see some cells scattered all over the place. Why not?
Okay.
I don't want to see you sweating only. I want to see some mental sacrifice as well. I'm kidding. Because if you look around you, kicking won't do.
All right. I suggest you take the ball next time.
Yeah. Did you see that thing you know by the bush? It's kind of odd, huh?
Oh, yeah. You know what it is? I mean, what was that?
You want mine?
No, thanks. Do you want mine?
No, thanks. What's the first thing you notice in the place? It's not because it has nice curves or great proportions. It's if there are people in it or not. If you go in an empty restaurant, you don't think if it's beautiful or not. You think if it's safe to eat there, right? Or walking down the street at night. Even if the place is beautiful and nice, it takes a lot of meanings if there are people or not, and what kind of people. So this place is like that. Like a shell. Caught between meaningless and meaningful. A half full and half empty kind of place.
What were you looking for? A cut off finger? Garbage? A limb?
I think we should leave this place. It's like something that speaks saying go away. And when something says go away, I'll go away.
And you expect me to go and come around with you to look for lumps of soil and holes in the ground? There are memories in this place that are not for you, so leave them alone.
told you it's cruel. It's all gone.
That is based on false belief.
No, belief is fine. I know who I am. You should take a look upstairs. It gives you a different sense of scale about who you are.
And leave you down here. I don't care about the view. It's just like a picture. Things seeming pretty because they're far away. I like the feeling of my body up there instead. The feeling of doing something wrong. Every footstep being wrong. Doing something I'm not meant to do or like. I like the feeling of being unnatural. It places me.
Yeah, you like cruelty. You like to frighten yourself. That's what I thought.
That's my camera.
It's like being caught up with the older boys. You don't realize they have nothing to offer you. The only valuable is imaginary. Not like real people. It's like that bird. Now it's here. Now it's gone.
You freak me out. When he is here, you are well, not sick. And when he is not here, you are sick. I don't get it. When we're alone, you're always sick, and with him, you're not. Why?
No, I'm exhausted, really. I have nothing more to give you. You know, it's not just down to you. If I'm sick, it's my body. It's your reality, it's where you go. I think it's time you start to think about why you were here. Why you scare yourself. So what do you say? It's time for you to give me something more.
That's up to you. It's your space.
Your space, my space, same thing. But you need to move before it all catches up. Because you are high up with nothing underneath you, and it's a long way down. Do you understand? There's no one there to catch you. Do you know that?
So I'm going to be quick because I'd like to have some discussion maybe with you guys. So I mentioned it's the construction stopped in '75 because of the eruption of the Civil War. And the Civil War, as you know, lasted for a really long time. And so during that period, it was closed. It wasn't finished. It was used for military use. The big auditorium you saw was kind of ammunition storage, and there was landing platforms for helicopters and so on. And but even after the Civil War, they attempted to open it a little bit for the public, but again, it's not finished. So it's basically been left as a kind of closed-off space. Occasionally, it's opened, and people can come in sometimes during the week, or people do anyway. But the kind of status of the place is really that it's closed off. And by now, it would cost too much to renovate it and make it to complete it. Basically, you have to not only build something from new, you have to kind of tear down the other things or renovate what's there, which is even more expensive in a way. So it became a kind of instant ruin. And what I did was I had a plan for the piece, obviously, since I tried to shoot it in 2008, but it didn't happen. And then I did get to shoot it in 2010. The reason why it didn't happen in 2008 was there was a kind of resurgence of violence and so on, and there were road bombs and things like this between Beirut and Tripoli. But in 2010, and I went there with two actors that I worked with for a long time, and then met up with the two actors from Lebanon, and obviously with cameras and stuff like this, and constructed the whole piece on site, kind of in response to the place, giving myself very kind of short deadlines and so on for writing up dialogue and so on. I had obviously some structures already made. Like, for example, I wanted to bring in this kind of element, kind of surreal element of the kind of unformed body in the piece, and so that's this piece of meat that shows up in the beginning, and it becomes not one but two bodies during the film. And it was also a little bit kind of jokey reference to David Lynch and Twin Peaks, where Laura Palmer arrives in the first episode wrapped in bed sheets and cellophane. But when I was there working with people, one of the kind of crew members, he had been a former sergeant in the Lebanese army, and he got very occupied with this scene, and he wanted to be in it. And he told me that they assassinated people that way. So you got wrapped in plastic. You can't move, you can't say anything. You can see for a while until your eyes fog up, but you can't breathe and so on. So it got a much more kind of intimate connection, I guess, to the kind of history and kind of history of violence in that site. So yeah. And but there, I guess, I pushed this idea for myself in terms of writing very much to the extreme. So writing everything from somewhat of a plan, but writing every scene the night before the recordings. Also, the shooting. Also, to work with the kind of actors' possibility to respond to the material or prepare themselves or not prepare themselves, and so on. But the idea was also then that I was trying to make some kind of anti-architecture documentary, I guess, you know. So how could I deal with such a site which has such a particular history and has such a kind of uncanny relationship to recent kind of history in Middle East connected to European history also. I became interested in these sites also as this kind of very, very theatrical kind of tableaus or very kind of stage-like environments. So I set up to write this kind of very fragmented parts of basically different narratives over a kind of very, I guess, dramatic, almost kind of pathetic dramatic form in response to the place also. I see time is running really fast, so maybe I have other things to show and so on, but I think it's maybe better I open up to questions or discussion. Maybe we have if some people have some things to contribute with, or specific questions? Oh, there's something in the back there. Yeah.
In terms of having an installation where you have a wraparound screen room kind of thing, perhaps some gaps where you're not sure what's going to happen as you go between the screens of one environment, is that something that you've ever done with this or any other place where it's a vista, wide space?
Maybe it's because I'm standing right on the there. I heard most of what you said, maybe not everything, but yes, I think I have an answer to that. Let me see here. It's not like I think I heard you say something like wrap around or something. Yeah, it's not really wrap around, but I work with this kind of back projection screen, so that you enter into the space first from the other side. I've done that in several ways. So here also I had some of these elaborations on these kind of fence-like spaces. So so you see the film through these kind of layers of fencing, and you can also so you maybe only have about a little bit more than this, like 2 meters or something between this fence and the back wall. So you're quite kind of close to the architecture and so on. And then seeing the film. And some people have seen the film, this film and other films, just from the kind of mirrored side, seen the whole film that way. So, and then from the other side, if you walk around or through next to the screen, you can see it the right way around and sit down on this kind of cement seating. This is different, similar situation. So yeah, that's just transition from one to the other, and you can see the kind of image through layers of fencing. So I mean, I think just like the exhibition format is really an interesting format, and it's a way to kind of incorporate. I can't really see you well,
yes.
But the kind of physical reading and the physical experience and so on, which I'm quite occupied with anyway, into the work. And I'm not really bothered by this thing that you can't see the film necessarily from the beginning to the end. I think it's you have just totally different relationship to time in the exhibition context, and unless the film is too long, you can just kind of join it together. If you concentrate on it and you sit there for long enough, you kind of join the pieces together.
And also, auxiliary question to that. Years ago, I was impressed by there was money, small amounts of money to add to small spaces that were used often, like entrances to the subway. And there might be a pipe where you could play with sound. Someone else is hearing what you're whispering or whatever, or other in between might be actual sound that's recorded and gets activated if you go past a sensor. So my question does have to do with the exterior of buildings as exhibition space, especially busy over scale, big scale in the city, which makes people not feel so significant. So stories, they could invent their own stories, and there could be certainly a commentary about where this is and where they could see more of it. But just in the public spaces in Europe, in general, is there still that allowance of a tiny amount of money for such a thing?
Well, it depends on the place and the context, I guess. But in any case, I do like to work in the public space also. And what I've done sometimes, which I maybe forgot to say, is I also inserted these films into public spaces. Like I shot this film, which was largely shot in a park in Salzburg, actually, and it was exhibited in the park. I found a kind of area of the park which had just enough of a closure, just enough of a possibility to concentrate on something. So it was kind of open, kind of closed, and mounted a screen and some speakers and so on there. It's difficult, of course, because in many parts of the urban environment, then it becomes really trivial. You can't see it, or it's competing with too many other things and so on. And at the moment now, with this film I'm shooting in Oslo, in Grorud, one of the things, one of the first things I'm doing with it is to make this public installation in a public space outside in the center of Oslo, kind of in an area where people from all parts of the city kind of move through to, you know, to go to work or go to schools or to go shopping or whatever. So it's kind of area, it's kind of transitory space for people from different parts of the city. So I wanted to put this piece, which is giving a really different representation of that area in the center of the city. But of course, what I'm competing with then is lots of noise, lots of different other signs and so on. So I'm attempting to make a kind of a space that is enclosed enough that you get some concentration. I don't mind interference. There, you know, like there is some interference from other things around you, but it just has to function so that you get enough of a degree of concentration. But also I wanted this space to be open 24 hours a day, so people that know it's an exhibition, they can go and see it. But for the most part, maybe it's people that come by at different parts of the day, daytime, nighttime, whatever, and can come by and go and see it. And I've done that before, but of course that makes it even more complicated, because you have to make a space that's also then that functions like this, but also the space that doesn't become a kind of threatening space or dangerous space to be in the city. But yeah.
One more point with audio. Here at the Media Lab, we had audio spotlights.
Yeah.
You can direct sound.
Yeah.
You can direct sound down in these kinds of where everything else is so interruptive.
Yeah.
They're like pizza pans.
You do have, yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Knut, for the presentation. It was really interesting to be able to see all of these different aspects together. And I'm interested in what you have been talking about in terms of the physical dimension of the space. I continue to be curious about a certain kind of desire to combine these different elements. And I was wondering if you could maybe speak a bit more about like a kind of, almost like a compulsion to put these things together. Because I've seen different installations and configurations. And I think in terms of the guests who've come so far, you've used more instances of the combination of altering the spaces and then having a kind of interweaving between spaces that are represented in the film parts, as well as ways in which a viewer might approach the work when they're entering into the space itself. And I'm interested in that in relation to what you mentioned in the very beginning about how you came to begin working in these different forms. And so you mentioned being writer, writing, and so the ways in which narrative functions and the spatial dimensions of like how whomever it is who would be the perceiver would encounter what's going on.
Yeah, that's interesting. You mentioned this thing with narrative, because I mean that's the way it started for me in terms of my conscious approach to it. At that time was really I was in the 90s. I was quite occupied with this idea of narrative space, narrative installations, and not in terms of a space where you would come and you find like a kind of used coffee cup or something, some kind of narrative described for you. But where you become implicated in a narrative through moving through it, through the space, or through the installation in relation to other viewers and so on. And at that time I worked a lot with kind of different kind of sites within the city. Often this kind of idea of heterotopic sites, or sites that have this kind of non-spaces within society that. For kind of individuals of crisis or deviation in relation to the society. There can be many different ones. Typical ones that could be mentioned would be, for example, you could say a sex club, but also, for example, the temporary function of a park at nighttime, where it goes from being the kind of representational space of the things that are made visible by the city. So, you know, you have the nice park, this kind of fantasy of urbanism and so on. And I don't see parks as kind of representation of nature. It's more kind of part of the very idea of modern urbanity in many ways. But it changes from that to the space where all these things that are that can't be seen in daylight are happening. So you have the drug trafficking, sexual cruising, or even just like loner hangouts and so on. This kind of space for people that want to practice some kind of practice, might even be totally by themselves, but that in its very essence shouldn't be seen by the larger public. So so I would let me see if I have something here that's relating a little bit to it. It's this is not really an example of how I worked with those installations in the 90s, but this is how I kind of took those installations and met with the practice of showing films, actually. So this it's a bit hard to see. This is you can see just the beginning of an installation. So it would be an installation that was fully made of live trees and bushes and flowers and grass and soil and so on. But on the kind of reverse time cycle. So in the exhibition hours, it would be dark. So it would be like this nighttime park. And then when the exhibition closed in the evening, the grow lights went on and so on. So it was sustained by light and watering. So it had different kind of subspaces. So you come here, you see like little space with some benches. You could sit down. You could go. And you could go left and right and down different paths. And these are just an assembly of versions from different exhibition places. Some were larger, some were smaller, or whatever. This is from the Venice Biennale. Actually, just shows at nighttime when the lights went on. Then it became a kind of visual piece for whoever was walking the park and the Giardini at night. But that was a particular one. But this this sense that you were walking through this dark space, and of course the reason why nightclubs and sex clubs and so on are dark is this thing that there's a kind of erasure of identification and of subjectivity to a degree, and kind of assimilation into the space, into the kind of narrative and subjectivity of that space. So when you first enter, you feel like as if space is looking back on you because you can't see things clearly, but you sense that there are people there and so on. After a little while, you become part of this kind of eyes that see, but also project onto other people and other bodies and so on. So also in the function of this piece, and as a kind of narrative, you come in and your eyes adjust, and you sense, might hear other people, you sense them and so on, and you kind of you project it into this kind of narrative of this art piece in a way. And but then I combined this with the. At first, I was making these installations and I had these separate rooms with these films, and then I started thinking that this separation was really not necessary. It wasn't so important for me to represent this park space in a kind of one-to-one, as a one-to-one representation of this space from the outside. I always made it kind of context specific to the different cities I made it in and so on, but I thought that was maybe irrelevant. And the kind of acoustic qualities of this park also lent itself to audiovisual content, and also because you have this actually, even if you have no audio or visual stuff in that park, one of the most striking things when you come into this installation, like when I had just as these parks, was actually the sound, or the kind of total change in sound by going from a normal exhibition space into this kind of park landscape inside it. But also this kind of this possibility of different sight lines and so on, I thought was quite interesting. So you would come around corner, you would see a little bit of a film, and you maybe saw more, and you got into this kind of square. This is at the Boijmans Verbouwingen Museum in Rotterdam, and then you could sit there. And then we were also quite far into the space. So that was another thing in relation to just showing films, like to position the film content that needs some kind of concentration on it, that needs you to have the possibility to get drawn into it, in a position where you couldn't stand with one foot outside the door and one foot inside outside or inside the door and just look at it and then go out, but you had to actually enter into the space and become a little bit part of the kind of narrative of the place and find the film within it. So you're already in a different kind of mode of concentration, hopefully. And so that's something I've kind of done with several of the films. But yeah, this is a very bright shot. Anyway, so you see the, but there were different ones. There were more like built environments and so on. But I mean, back to this compulsion. I guess in one way, I just like to show my work in whatever way I can. So I also like the situation of the cinema and film festivals and so on. But at the same time, I'm quite occupied with this way we experience things. It's never undisrupted anyway. And like say, many of us, most of us probably see more films at home, for example, than we do in the cinema. And so you're watching something, somebody calls, you're thinking about something else, you might be talking to somebody. There's always this kind of different kind of interruptions that are at play. And I'm quite interested in working with that as a kind of possibility within the exhibition space too. Of course, the kind of interruptions to the film that I create are very different than if your phone rings, but I mean, your phone might also ring when you're in the exhibition space. But in any case, yeah, so that was to the compulsion. I'm going on and we are short of time. Yeah, yeah. Anything else? Or, yeah.
Just curious if you have any specific film directors that you're most influenced by.
Yeah, I'm not sure. That's the kind of question that's really difficult to answer, because I'm probably the way I think is I'm really most influenced by things that happen around in my everyday life and things I see. This kind of just mixture of things from just everyday events to I don't know, to news, to fragments of things I don't even know who made and so on. And but like many other people in my generation, I've been heavily influenced by people like Godard and so on. And I guess the reason for that is really the kind of, I mean, a lot of his work is problematic and so on, but his insistence on that you have to think about the politics of your language, I think is really important. And I think that resonates really well with people from an art background, which I think is quite different from a lot of filmmakers that come from film background to art background. I think a lot of artists are trained more in being occupied with the kind of conventions of the language and critical to the conventions of the language you're using, and more occupied with the kind of politics of your language, you know, like how things are being said are obviously an important part of what is being said. And this is something we understand in our everyday lives. For example, in the way we use slang, or how by saying things, you know, like in a smaller group of friends or something, you might have your own language, or different kind of societal groups might speak, you know, the kind of official language broken or whatever. We use this in our everyday life quite often, kind of without reflecting a lot on it. So I think in our everyday lives, we really understand this thing of kind of the politics of language. But within filmmaking, it has been kind of left out a lot. Oh yeah, time is up. Sorry. I can read still though. Very good. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Thank you for coming. Yeah.